With a moment of silence for those who wish to reflect. Sneaking up on me, huh?
It's enough already with the, I knew all that stuff already. If you don't know any Yiddish, you probably won't get everything in "Twas the Night Before Hanukkah," but you'll get most of it. So here we go. "'Twas the night before Hanukkah, boychicks and maidels. Not a sound could be heard, not even the dreidels. The menorah was set on the chimney alight. In the kitchen, the bubby hooked gecheptabite, salami and pastrami and a gluzel latte, a zyre and pickles with bagels, oy vey. Gesund and geschmack the kinderlach felt with dreaming of teglach and Hanukkah gelt. The clock on the mantelpiece was away and ticking, and Bubby was serving a shtickle of chicken. A tumult arose like 1,000 baruchas. Santa had fallen and broken his tuchas. I put on my slippers, eins, zwei, drei. When Bubby was now eating the herring and rye, I grabbed from my bathrobe and buttoned my gatkas while Bubby was drowning and devouring the latkes. To the window I ran, and to my surprise, a little red yarmulke greeted my eyes. Then he got to the door, and he saw the menorah, and he said, "Yiddischer Kinder," he said, "Kanai Nahara." I thought I was in a Goyish house, but as long as I'm here, I'll leave a few toys. With much geschrei, I asked, "Du bist a Yid?" "Avda, my numen is Shloimi Claus, kid. Come into the kitchen, I'll get you a dish. A gupple, a shtickle of fish." With smacks of delight, he started his fressen, chopped liver and knedlach and kreplach gegessen. Along with his meal, he had a few schnapps. When it came to eating, this boy was the tops. He asked for knishes with pepper and salt, but they were so hot, he yelled, "Oi gewalt." Unbuttoning his hazen and rising from the tish, he said, "Your kosher essen is simply delish." And as he went to the door, he said, "I'll see you later. I'll be back next Passover in time for the Seder." More rapid than eagles, his prancers they came, as he whistled and shouted and called them by name. Now Izzy, now Morris, now Yitzchak and Sammy, now Oiving and Maxie and Moishi and Manny. He gave a geshrei and he drove out of sight. A good yontif to all, and to all a good night. So that was the night before Hanukkah, and you may have heard that differently in the night before Christmas, right? You like this one better. Let me ask you a question. How many of you can name a Jewish holiday that falls usually in March? Purim. How many of you have, be honest, how many of you have heard of Purim? Not bad. All right, because you're all Jewish anyway. You all knew exactly how to do that. Do you think most people that you know have heard of Purim? No. If Hanukkah came in March, no one would know what Hanukkah was. It's that simple. Hanukkah comes at Christmas time. Everyone knows about Christmas time, probably because of the ads and the Coca-Cola and the whatever it all started, right? And that's it. And that's why Hanukkah became a big deal, because Christian kids were getting presents under their trees, and they were going to the same schools with the Jewish kids, and the Jewish parents didn't want their kids to feel bad. So they started giving them presents, and not just one night, but for 8 nights, because the oil lasted 8 days, and that was the miracle and everything else. It probably wasn't the miracle. It was a story that the rabbis put together. I don't want to say they invented it. I mean, you know, it must have been floating around out there, you know, in the 1st century AD, but it wasn't part of any Hanukkah story that we know of from when Hanukkah happened, which was in the 160s and 170s BC, okay? And what happened there was just part of the world growing. Alexander the Great died in, when did he die? Like 330 or something like that, and divided up his massive kingdom into three parts. There was the Greek part, Macedonia, and then there was the northern Middle East, which was essentially Syria, run by the Seleucids, and then there was the southern Middle East, run by Egypt, and those were known as the Ptolemies, but there's a P in there, so I don't want to spit into the microphone. But anyway, the Ptolemies. So the Seleucids up in the Syrian area, the Ptolemies down in the Egyptian area, and what's in between Syria and Egypt? Israel, right? Now Israel was definitely there, and there had been a kingdom in Israel, a commonwealth in Israel, since the 9th century BC with King David and then Solomon and Saul and the whole bit, okay? So they were in between these two essentially warring factions of the northern Syrian Greeks and the southern Egyptian Greeks. And when one went down to fight the other and go back home with the booty, they were passing through Israel. And as they passed through Israel, they passed through Jerusalem, and Jerusalem had a lovely temple there, and they would usually just take whatever they wanted, any of the silver, the gold, and whatever, and they would go off. But with Hellenization happening pretty intensely these last 200 years before Jesus, there was a lot of pressure to Hellenize, to become Greek, to get into all the stuff, the Greek pantheon of gods, and so much played with the human body and physical fitness and all of that kind of stuff, that a lot of the Jews were saying, hey, this is pretty good stuff. What's wrong with this? We're going to go along with it. And there started to be an assimilation kick, especially from the Syrians. They wanted everyone to be unified. It used to, before that, 300s, 200s BC, it was okay. You can have whatever religion you want. We don't care. Do your thing, do your own thing. And that was really cool. We should come back to that these days around the world, where whatever you want to believe in or not believe in is good. Well, that's the way it was 2 millennia ago. And then they decided, no, we need to become more one unit. And so there was a kick for assimilation. So Jewish people, stop circumcising your babies, stop worrying about kosher food, stop observing the Sabbath. All of that kind of stuff was out. And the king at the time was named Antiochus the fourth. There were a whole bunch of other ones, obviously, a third, a second, a first, and other Syrian kings. But this one really wanted to see this assimilation happen. And many of the Jews hopped on the bandwagon. So there was, in the 160s and 170s BC, there was kind of a civil war going on among the Jews in between Syria and Egypt. So the Jews were the ones who kind of brought around the downfall of the Jewish state at the time and allowed the Syrians, the Greeks, to come in and Hellenize pretty much everything. And so they did, and they ransacked the temple in Jerusalem. They were on their way back from a failed attempt to conquer the Ptolemies in Egypt. And in the 160s, the late 160s to the mid 160s BC, around winter time, it was actually before winter, it was in the fall of 165 BC, that they had ransacked the temple, and this one guy outside of, halfway between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, in a town called Modi'in, and his name was Matityahu, and Mattathias had a bunch of sons, among them Judah, right? And they knew how to do guerrilla warfare. It's a very hilly area, and they would hide in the hills. And when the Syrian soldiers came through, they would sneak up on them and dispatch them to heaven or wherever. And they ended up kicking out the Syrian Greek soldiers, all right? And that was considered a miracle. The few Jews were able to fight off the Syrian Greek soldiers and win the day, okay? And that was great. They got back to the temple, according to the book of the Maccabees, which appears only in Catholic Bibles. Go figure. Right. Go figure. You got the apocryphal literature. It's not in most Protestant Bibles, and it's certainly not in the Jewish Bible, the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament. It doesn't appear. Hanukkah does not appear in the Old Testament. And yet all of your kids know a lot about it, right? And it's not even in the Bible. So that's kind of cool that it's made it that far. On the other hand, it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough for the rabbis of the Talmud, and that's first, second, third centuries AD. It wasn't enough for, and I'm saying AD, CE is the way it's usually called, common era, because AD is Anno Dominum, the year of our Lord. He was a nice Jewish guy. I don't mind saying AD, and BC. I mean, it was like, that's the thing these days too. We end up getting all of this holiday anguish. Jewish parents from the 1970s on, I think, got very upset when they saw a Christmas tree in the public school and nothing Jewish, right? Well, there was nothing Jewish because, again, if Hanukkah had fallen in March, no one would know about it. So there really wasn't much to worry about. However, seeing the Christmas tree or seeing the creche on the lawn of the town, the courthouse or something like that, people threw a fit. There needed to be, to balance out that little Jewish kid sitting in laying in the basket there needed to be a 12-foot menorah right next to it, all right? And what's the problem with that? The problem with that is there's no blessing you say over a creche. There's certainly no blessing you say over a Christmas tree. How many Christians do you know that see real Christian religious significance in the tree? Not too many. The only people that see religious significance in a Christmas tree are Jews. I don't know why. I do not know why. Oh my God, it's a Jewish family and they have a Christmas tree. Oh no, this is horrible. My child's marrying into that. This is terrible and everything like that. Not so much. It's Hallmark. I mean, it's lovely. It's beautiful. It's green when everything else is brown and all the leaves fell off and everything like that. It's pagan too, right? Why not? There was celebrations going on. What? Anyway, so that became the big thing. And then you put a menorah up. But what I didn't say with the kids is there's a blessing we're supposed to say when we light that Hanukkah menorah. We say, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddeshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehadlik ner shel Hanukkah. We are commanded by God, according to Jewish law, to kindle the Hanukkah lights. Well, that's religious ritual. Does religious ritual like that belong on the town green? I don't think so. I mean, not from my perspective, it doesn't, right? But it doesn't bother you. It's not that I'm losing sleep over it, believe me. But the folks that, we have an enhanced Jewish community now that a lot of folks from Chabad, from the Lubavitch sect of very religious Judaism, black hats, black coats, and the fringes and everything like that, moving in to Kingston, moving to Dallas. Rabbi Sirota has a number of folks in Dallas, right? Which is not exactly your next door neighbor. Sometimes you have to take a car to visit your next door neighbor, right? Because it's the wide open spaces out here. And they are making a huge influx into town, driving around with menorahs, lit menorahs, showing which day of Hanukkah it is on their car. Okay, you think you're hailing an Uber? No, it's the Hanukkah mobile there, and that's what you're getting. And it's fine, but why? Because the Talmud, again, in the 2nd century, said, "Pirsumi Nisa," you need to publicize the miracle of Hanukkah. And again, that's great, that's fine. Which miracle? Well, the Talmudic miracle that when they went in to clean out the pantheon, the Greek gods from the temple in Jerusalem, and rededicated, they only found enough oil to last for 1 night, and miraculously, it lasted for 8 nights. Can you imagine if it was 16 nights that the thing lasted? This would have really been a crippling thing for Jewish parents to have to buy all those presents. Anyway, did that happen? Did the oil? We don't know. It's certainly nothing from the time, the 160s. For the next 100 years, nobody ever heard of oil lasting 8 days. Right? It just wasn't in any Josephus, any of the other Greek or Roman writers. It's not in the books of the Maccabees or anything like that. So it came later because the rabbis weren't necessarily so excited about the ultimate outcome of Hanukkah. Hanukkah means to dedicate, so they rededicated the temple in Jerusalem. That they did. But then what happened? The Romans beat the Greeks, and in 70 AD, burned down Jerusalem and the temple, and killed an awful lot of Jews at the time, right? And sent the Jews scampering. And that was a very low point for Judaism. So if that's the result of the Hanukkah miracle, it's nothing to celebrate. Right? We're not going to be all happy and excited about that. But if you come up with a religious ritual that celebrates something else, something religious, and not just a short-lived military victory. By the way, who gives gifts to your kids for short-lived military victories? That's the one that I don't really get at all, right? But thank God, and I do thank God, I love this season, love the Christmas music. I think it is beautiful. I mean, not I Saw Santa kissing whatever, right? Whatever it is, mommy kissing Santa Claus, right? Most of which were written by Jews anyway, not the traditional carols, but a lot of the modern, even Rudolph was written by a Jewish fellow. Again, not necessarily someone who was running to synagogue every day, but still there was the Jews in America were so happy to be in America and out of Eastern Europe that they celebrated whatever was being celebrated here in America. And that it just stayed that way, which is kind of cool. But anyway, the idea of making a big deal about Hanukkah came much later, and probably because there was assimilation into the Greek society, and that bothered the rabbis and threatened to end the future of Judaism. Now, what's interesting is that it didn't really end there. It kept going on all the way down to Herod, who was Jewish, right? So it continued all the way into the beginning of the Christmas story with Jesus, right? And there had been Jews living in that area, and under Judah the Maccabee's nephew, Alexander Jannaeus, and they took Greek names. Aristobulus is not exactly Manny Schwartz, right? I mean, they took Greek names too and everything else. Alexander Jannaeus grew the Hasmonean, which was the family name for the Maccabees, the Hasmonean kingdom, grew it into this. Now, the blue here is the Mediterranean Sea. The blue here, going from the Sea of Galilee down to the Dead Sea, that's the river. When we hear about from the river to the sea, right? Palestine will be free. It wasn't called Palestine for another, 400 years. The Romans renamed it Palestina, Syria Palestina, which they got the word Palestina, from here, from Gaza. That was the Philistines. And it was Romanized into Palestine, right? So the Palestinians, the Philistines, ceased to exist 1,000 years before zero, when King David conquered them, right? You remember the story of Samson pulling down the temple, the Philistine temple, with his last ounce of strength and everything like that. They were long gone, right? And I'm not making any kind of political comments now. If you're Palestinian, you say this is where your family is from or your ancestry is from, then that's where it's from. What am I going to do? All I know is that the Jews who were living in Palestine prior to 1948 called themselves Palestinian, and it said Palestine on their passport, right? So it didn't matter what religion or what background you were. If you were living in this general geographical area, that's what you were called. But under the successive leaders of the Jewish Commonwealth here in this area known as Palestine, everything in here except this little bit of white over here, everything else was under Jewish control 2,000 years ago. It was, which means that up until Lebanon was all under Jewish control. Syria on this side, all under Jewish control, and a massive amount of not only Jordan, because it was both sides of the river, but also Saudi Arabia. Parts of Saudi Arabia were forcibly converted. I'm not saying this was pleasant stuff, but the Idumeans living down there were forcibly converted by Alexander Jannaeus. And forcible conversion, for the men at least, hurts. Because you know what that meant. It meant forced circumcision as well, right? So he forcibly circumcised, according to the books of the Maccabees, 10,000 Idumeans against their will, okay? So it wasn't all pleasant, believe me, but it was a lot of territory. And again, from both sides of the river to the sea, that was the Hasmonean kingdom. So, I mean, it's one thing to say, nah, we got to divvy it up differently this way, this time. And you've heard me before saying, okay, I'm all for it. Let's invite all the Israelis, 7 million of them, to move to Montana. It would be a quicker trip to Israel if Israel moved to Montana. And, well, who's going to fight? Right? There's an elk, there's a moose, there's a Jewish guy, right? I mean, and as I've said, overnight, Montana would become the wealthiest state in the United States. But the idea of what's going on in this neighborhood is nothing new, folks, right? Jesus grew up with all of this mess going on here, right? And the Romans came in, they burned down the temple, and it was essentially that way. It wasn't no Jews living there. There were still Jews living there, but essentially it wasn't under Jewish control again until the United Nations in 1948. So are we living through more of this today? Interesting. One of the ancient prayers for lighting the candles is, "Blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, not only has commanded us, but who did miracles for us and for our people, Bayamim Hahem, in ancient days, and Bazman Hazeh, and in our day." We can't lose sight of the miracles that God is still performing for us every day. Forget political miracles. Just think about the miracles in our own lives. When you see a Hanukkah menorah, when you see these candles, and some folks who came up or online and were talking about blessings in their life, the blessing doesn't require you to necessarily bow before a deity. The blessing is recognizing your own gratitude for the things you normally take for granted. So if Hanukkah has made a dent in the world, and the kids are happy spinning dreidels and eating chocolate coins and everything like that, that's great. But let it also be a message, a time for our own gratitude for everything that's already going right in our lives. That way, we end up being happier, and we're more pleasant to the people around us. So hopefully that's going to happen, and wish everybody a happy and a healthy and a good new year.